In this video, we're going to talk about a very important principle in object-oriented programming, and that is interface segregation principle. Based on this principle, we should segregate or divide a big fat interface into a bunch of smaller ones. And with this, we can reduce the impact of changes. Let me show you this in code. So in this project, I'm going to add a new interface. Let's call it UI widget. Examples of UI widgets are text boxes, checkboxes, radio buttons, and so on. So let's add this interface. Here I'm going to declare three methods: drag, resize, and render. Let's not worry about the parameters of this method. All we need to know is that we need to have these capabilities in a UI widget. We should be able to drag it, resize it, and render it on the screen. Now let's add a class that uses this interface. So I'm going to add a new class called dragger. Let's imagine we use this class to drag an object on the screen. So here we're going to add a method called drag that takes a UI widget. Now in this method, we're going to call the drag method of this widget. So widget.drag, and then perhaps we do some extra work. Let's just do a print line and say dragging done. So with this implementation, our dragger class is coupled or dependent on the UI widget interface. So it's coupled to this contract. Now here's the problem. If we change the signature of the resize method, let's say we add a new parameter here, our dragger class will get affected and has to be recompiled. Even though it's not using this capability, it doesn't care about resizing UI widgets. Now here we're dealing with a relatively small interface, but we have mixed different concerns or capabilities. Now, what if we had an interface with 10 methods or 20 methods? That interface could change for several reasons. And every time we change that interface or contract, all the classes that are dependent on that interface, as well as their dependencies, may get affected. So this is where the interface segregation principle comes to the rescue. It says that we should divide this interface into smaller ones. Each interface should be focused on a single capability. So here we're dealing with different capabilities. One is dragging objects, the other is resizing them, and finally rendering them. So here we should extract a new interface and move this drag method there. Let me show you. So we can declare a new interface, call it draggable. Look at the naming convention. Here I'm using the able postfix, like draggable or resizable. So in this interface, we're going to have our drag method. I can move this method here very easily. Now we have a warning because we should declare each interface or each class in a separate file. So here we can press Alt and Enter and move this class to draggable.java. All right. Now back to our dragger class. We're no longer going to work with the UI widget interface. We're going to work with the draggable interface. So all we need here is an object that can be dragged. We don't care if it's a UI widget or not. We don't care if it's resizable or not. We can also rename this parameter to draggable. Now look at the methods declared here. We only have the drag method. So this interface is very lightweight. We have only one coupling point. In contrast, if we had a big interface with 10 methods, we would have 10 coupling points. Now, back to our UI widget interface. Let's say there are parts of our application where we need to work with this interface, and there we need all these capabilities in one place. We need to be able to drag, resize, and render an object. So here we can use inheritance between these interfaces. We can type extends draggable. Now this UI widget interface will inherit the drag method from the draggable interface. So if we go back to the dragger class and replace this with UI widget, look, now we have drag, render, and resize. So this is how we can apply the interface segregation principle. Let's do this one more time. I'm going to show you a shortcut. So back to our UI widget interface. This time I want to move the resize method to a different interface like resizable, but I'm not going to type this by hand. I want to get IntelliJ to do it for me. So we put the caret on this method, press Ctrl and T to bring up the refactoring palette. Here we're going to extract an interface. What is that interface? We can call it resizable. Now over here, we can select the methods that we want to move. So the resize method, and then refactor. IntelliJ is saying interface resizable has been successfully created. Beautiful. At this stage, IDEA can analyze usages of UI widget and replace them with usages of resizable where possible. Do you want to proceed? No, we don't want to do that. All right, see what we have now. So back to the project, we have a new interface, resizable. This interface is very lightweight. It only has a single method. And by the way, it doesn't mean that anytime you have an interface with 3 methods, you should segregate it into 3 interfaces, each with a single method. That's not the point of this lesson. The point here is that you should segregate different capabilities. So resizing and dragging an object are 2 different capabilities, but we might have different ways to resize an object. For example, we might have another resize method that takes 2 parameters like this. Or we might have another method like resize 2 and give it a UI widget so we can resize an object to match the size of another object. As you can see, all these methods are around the same capability. Now, one last thing before we finish this lesson. Back to our UI widget interface. So as we can see, this interface is extending 2 interfaces, draggable and resizable. So unlike classes, a Java interface can have multiple parents, but this is not a problem. This is not going to bring the problems with multiple inheritance, because if these parents declare the same method with the same signature, this interface will inherit only one of them. There is no ambiguity. In contrast, a class cannot have multiple parents because it is possible that these parents declare a method with the same signature but with different implementations. We talked about it in the last section. So be aware that in Java, a class cannot have multiple parents, but an interface can have multiple parents.